Hello, I'm Chef Joshua Riazzi of Kids Can Cook. Today we'll be making a summertime grilled cheese sandwich with two of our kitchen interns, Fred and Lee. The first thing that we're going to do for these sandwiches is make a little bit of charred corn. In a bowl we have raw corn. This is about the corn from two full ears of corn, and it's completely raw. We haven't done anything but cut it off of the cob. Lee has a very hot pan here. You'll see the flame is on right about medium to medium high. No oil in the pan. This is very important for our charring process. We just want this corn to get a little bit of color on it. And as soon as it has that color, it's completely done. Now, as we add it to the pan in small batches, we're going to hear that sizzle. That lets us know that our pan is at the right temperature. You might hear some small popping, and you might actually see a few kernels of corn kind of come at you, but it's a pretty safe process. We're basically going to use this wooden spoon to stir it around, and you can see how quickly the corn is charring. As soon as it has a nice brown look to it, it's completely done. It doesn't need to have char on all edges. It just needs to have really one side or so of each kernel charred. And as soon as we have that, we can put it into a pan to cool, and we can start the process over again. So Lee, I'm going to have you finish off our corn. We'll turn the heat down just a touch. Go ahead and grab that pan. Great. Now this char is really fantastic because it gives the corn a very delicate, smoky flavor, which works very well with the sweetness of that corn. So while Lee's finishing that, we're going to make a custard. The variation on this sandwich is interesting because we're going to soak the bread in a little bit of a custard. For our custard, we have 2 cups of milk and 6 whole eggs. The eggs have been cracked into a bowl so that we can whip them, pretty much like you would for an omelet here. We're breaking up the egg yolks, and we're just going to start to whisk. Now, the way that we know we're done whisking here is by basically taking a look at our eggs. We want this to look like one completely smooth mixture. And here we can see there's still a little bit of the egg yolk and the egg white, so we know that we need to continue whisking. Once our eggs are completely whipped, we're going to add our milk and a touch of salt, about 1 tablespoon of salt actually, to this mixture. And we can take another look at the eggs, and you can see that it's really nice and uniform. We're going to add our milk. And what this does is it's going to soak right into the bread, and it's going to give us a little bit of creaminess in the bread, but also a little bit of texture so that when it cooks in the pan, not only will the bread toast, but it'll also give it a nice, almost like a French toast texture. I'm going to add our 1 tablespoon of salt. Mix this. Once we're done with this, we can start to take our bread. I'll see the... Really want to soak the bread here. Most of the time, even when you use fresh bread, it takes about 30 seconds or so to really soak that mixture in. If we were to pull the bread out now, even though it looks like it's nicely coated, it's really not quite completely saturated with that custard mix. So now that this is soaked for about 30 seconds, we can take our tongs. You do want to get some of that extra custard off of the bread, and you just want to set it right down into a sheet pan or onto a plate. Now Fred's going to finish with all pieces of bread here, and we have about 6 pieces of bread. All right, so for this sandwich, we're going to make 2 variations. The first here has fontina cheese, and our bread that's been marinated in the custard is going to get layered with the fontina first. This is a very important step here. You always want to layer the cheese first onto the bread, because as this cooks in the pan, that's going to be your binder that holds everything else together. So we actually need both pieces of bread to have some cheese on there, and you don't need to overkill it. The cheese will melt and will mix in with all the other ingredients, so if there are a few gaps on the bread, that's fine. We just want to create a nice even layer there. And for the first sandwich, we're going to create a little layer of this charred corn. We're going to add in basil leaves. We're also going to put some sliced zucchini. And now it's very important as you're adding ingredients here to season the layers as you go. You really want everything to have a nice flavor to it. So we're putting just a little bit of salt on the zucchini. We're also going to put our tomatoes on. Another important step here is to make sure that you slice your tomatoes ahead of time so that some of that excess water and juice can leach out. You don't want that to make your bread soggy. This first sandwich is basically assembled. We're just going to take the top side of the bread and set it right on top. Now, we're going to come over to our pan, and the first step is to add a little bit of oil to the pan. We're going to coat the bottom. We don't need a lot of oil in here. But we do want enough to really keep the bread from sticking. We're also going to add some butter. The way that we know that our pan is ready here for our sandwich to go in is that not only will our butter start to melt, but it'll also start to froth or sizzle in the pan. If your butter is browning and splattering, that's way too hot. It's going to toast the bread too quickly before it really melts everything else. Now that we're getting that really light sizzling sound in the pan, we're just going to swirl the butter around so that it makes a little mixture of butter and oil. As soon as all of our butter chunk here is melted, we're ready to add in our sandwich. This looks like it's just about there. So we'll pick up our bread. I'll set it into the pan. You should hear a very slight sizzle as well, but it shouldn't splatter. If it splatters, again, your pan is too hot. We're just going to watch the heat here as this cooks. We're going to make sure that our oil is coating the entire bottom piece of bread. And we're going to leave that in for a minute while we assemble our second sandwich. Now this is basically just another variation, and as I mentioned before, you can use anything that you have. We're going to use fontina again. This time we shredded it though. And if you have shredded cheese instead of sliced, you would do exactly the same thing. You would coat both pieces of bread with a little bit of the cheese. Instead of basil in this one, we're going to use chopped chives. You really do want to add an herb to this because it's going to give you that really fresh, summery flavor. It's going to brighten up the other ingredients as well. We're also using avocado. And we sliced our avocado pretty thinly here. Avocado with melted cheese is kind of one of my favorite flavors and texture combinations. Again, you do want to make sure that you season this very lightly with some salt. We're going to use very thinly sliced onion. Now it's important that we slice this onion very thin because it's not cooked, but it is going to be very slightly heated, and I find that when onions are heated a little, their flavor and pungency tends to come out. You do want that to be really nice and thinly sliced. Then we're going to layer our zucchini. And again, we're going to finish with some sliced tomato. We can take this top layer here and rest it right on top. I give it a little press down at the end just to make sure that all of the ingredients settle in together. Now let's take a quick look at this sandwich. We can see that around our sandwich in the pan, the butter is starting to brown just a little. We want to give our sandwich a slight touch, either with our hands or with a set of tongs, to make sure that it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan. As long as it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan, we know that it's going to sizzle and really give that a nice golden brown crust. If it does stick just a little, we can grab a tool called a spatula, and we can just slide that gently underneath the sandwich. Now, I'm going to give this its first turn. This can be kind of a tough thing to master. So your first one may fall apart. If it does, there's no worry. Just try it over again. But basically, you're going to pick this up and with your hand on top, set it down, switch hands, and let that finish sizzling in the pan. You can see that the top piece of toast really does look almost like French toast. Since we didn't add any sugar to the custard, it's not going to have that sweet flavor. More so, it's just going to give it that really nice, rich kind of texture. As soon as you flip this, you do want to take a little salt and just dust it on the top slice of bread. I find that the salt sticks to that when it's freshly sauteed. So this is the time to do that. You don't want to wait until you pull it out. I can see on the edges here that my cheese is really starting to melt. Do you see it coming out of the edge there? That's exactly what you want. Once you see that cheese starting to melt, you can pull it out of the pan as long as your bread is nicely toasted and set it right onto the paper towels. That's going to give you the little bit of draining medium to take off some of the extra oil. Now, what I like to do is reset my pan. You can see here that I've got a really dark oil and butter mixture there, so I'm going to get rid of this mixture and start over again. So I put a little bit of oil in, another little chunk of butter. The pan is hot, so you're hearing that sizzle a little quicker, but it's not turning brown in the pan immediately, so we know that it's still at the right temperature. Now we can pick up our second sandwich and put it in. You can see that this is pretty quick once you have your sandwich assembled. It really just takes a minute or so to finish. We get ourselves a nice white platter. I like to use a white platter for this because you eat with your eyes, so you really do want to make sure that it's very nice and pretty. But you have all of these colors on the inside of the sandwich that are going to work really nicely with the white plate. Using a sharp knife, I just slice down. And you can see that cheese starting to come out. If I turn it to the side, you can see that everything was cut really thinly, so you're not really kneading it to cook the ingredients. You're really just melting the cheese, and all of the other ingredients are fresh enough that they're going to be very nice and tender. So this is our first variation of the sandwich. So here we have both of our grilled cheese sandwiches. I'm going to invite Freddie and Lee back over to try. This is the tomato and our avocado. You guys enjoy and let me know what you think. How are they? I hope you guys try these at home. Here we are, our summer grilled cheese sandwiches.